I'm Tim Kempton and I'd like to introduce Greg Jackson.
Hi, I'm Greg Jackson.
We've just seen Greg cast, and with no practice, just cast 115 feet. We all are interested in casting distance, and so Greg, I'd like today to go through all the principles of how you're getting that cast so we can all learn from you how to do that. So looking at some of the things you've been telling me, Greg, is that it's the use of power. And when I've been reading about physics to try and understand this, they talk about a thing called the force is equal to the mass times the acceleration. So the force is what's taken to actually move the object. Now in this case here, the mass is the weight of the line, and the acceleration is the rate at which the change in velocity. So you've told us that it's a lot to do with distance with the amount of line that you can carry, which is obviously the mass, the weight of the line. So could you tell us a bit about that, about how much line you've actually got to carry to be able to get distance?
Yeah, there's a few different designs in fly lines. Some of them are very weight forward, and others are more delicate, like a trout line, and others like the clouser line, have got a very heavy head. Pardon me. Using the energy that you can store in that head helps the line to unroll, and also the strip line or pull line from the ground or from the stripping basket and feed that into the cast also. So for some lines you can get away with carrying about 50 feet to get a 100-foot cast. That's cutting it really fine. That's sort of very generous on the distance. But a lot of other lines you probably want to carry about 60 feet, 60 to 70 feet.
So I'm understanding from you that the more line you can carry, the more weight you've got, so therefore you get better acceleration, you're going to get better force, so you get better distance.
Yes. There is a point where you get a certain length of the head out, and then I think the fine or running line behind can then actually start working against you. So if you could aerialise 100 foot of line, I don't think you could get the same ratio of cast distance from that 100 foot of aerialised line. Yeah, there's a very sort of happy or a sweet spot with the combination between the line and the rod. So when you're casting the line on the rod, you find out where the sweet spot is, and some people often mark that or tie a little nail with monofilament, so when they're stripping back to that, there it is, and they know that that's the optimum length of head and a little bit of belly line that will give him the maximum distance.
Yep. So Greg, the other point is the distance equals speed times time. So if we want to drive somewhere, the distance is going to be dictated by the speed that we go and the time that we're travelling. So in this, for casting and distance, again, time is obviously the time that the line can stay in the air,
yes,
avoiding gravity, and this is obviously the line speed that happens. So have you got any comment about that?
Yeah, sometimes the speed on a good day without wind or anything working against you, the caster, you can reduce the speed somewhat. You can spend more time in the air, but by getting the plane, which is the angle at which you launch the line, and the straightness of the cast, reduce that, spend more time in the air, and get a really long cast very easily. What happens is it works with efficiency more so than speed. And if you get the line going up into the air and you've got a good carry, good amount of line outside the tip of the rod, it would just gently, with efficiency, just open up and come down, and you can get quite a good cast.
When the loop forms, which means that the line speed is actually past the speed of the rod tip,
yes,
and then it starts to unroll,
yes,
and you're forming the loop. Obviously that loop is travelling faster, and the principle is that if we've got a fly line with the belly line, there's the belly and then the tapered head, and then the leader and then the tipper. But it's the transfer of energy that's making that line go faster and faster and then turn over at the end. So if we look at the energy equals a half, and again go back to the physics of this, that the energy applied is half times the mass times the velocity, which is the change of rate of speed, that if the weight of the line is getting less as it's unrolling, the velocity's got to be more, so it's actually got to be speeding up. And I'd like to actually demonstrate that. I brought my stock whip along, and I'd like to actually demonstrate how that works. So Greg, this is an Australian stock whip. I had this actually when I had my farm some years ago. So you've got the whip, this is the belly, the taper, down to the fall, and then the lash. So it's no different to a fly line. You've got the handle, you've got the running line, and then the belly, tapered line, down, and then you've got the tippet on the end. So the principle of this is obviously to make it break the sound barrier to crack. You've got to transfer the energy down, and as the line gets thinner and thinner, the energy is going to be transferred down, so the only thing that can happen, this has got to go faster, same as in the fly line. So if we just drop it on the ground, nothing happens. We put a little bit more into it, we can get it to crack. And there's all sorts of different ways to do it, but that's the principle of it, is that it's actually the transfer of energy simply because of the change in the diameter, the change of the mass. So it's the transfer of mass into energy, because we've applied the energy at this point here, and after that, it's just going faster and faster. So it's the same as in the fly line, it's going faster and the top leg has to be travelling faster. So Greg, one of the issues in this is actually we're forming loops, we talked about before, and the loop is when the speed of the line is going faster than the rod tip, so we're getting a loop form. Now what I've observed in this, and there's been some papers come out on the FFF recently, it's actually the shape of the loop that's dictating how long that line stays in the air. So we can get a loop that's shaped like this, which is called a dolphin nose. We can get a symmetrical loop, and then we're getting what they're calling a climbing loop, which I'm observing in yours of what you're climbing. Now, what's really interesting about that is they then talk about the drag on these lines, and you've got two different types of drag.
All right.
So Greg, the way in which these loops are formed is obviously a function of the drag, the leg tension, fly leg tension, and gravity. So this is the force down. In your cast, I'm noticing your line is always under tension. But drag is the one that we actually don't talk a lot about. So we've got in drag, we've got skin drag, and that is actually the resistance in the air of the fly line. So this is why we actually clean the fly line. I use something like this Aerospace 303. We actually wash our lines in soapy water. We then coat it with the 303 to make the line slick. And if you don't do that, you're going to have drag through the air and also through the runners on your line. But the one that we don't actually talk a lot about is form drag. And this is actually the profile of the line itself and the angle of the loop and how that flies through the air. So if I went back to the three loops we talked about before and looked at the form drag, it's quite interesting because I think that is part of the secret to why your loops work. So we had the dolphin nose, we have the symmetrical loop, and then we have the climbing loop. And the form drag is actually the angle that line is forming in the air. So that one's got an angle this way, this one's got an angle like that, and this has got an angle like that. And in the studies they did in America, this loop here has got 4 times the climbing capacity or ability than this. And to prove that yourself, if you're driving in your motor car and you put your hand out the window, doing that with safety, put your hand down like that and your hand will go down. There's a point at which it'll sit like this and it'll actually travel straight. But if you tilt it up, your hand will go in the air. And this has got, as I say, 4 times the lifting capacity to lift it. So going back to that distance equals speed times time, if that line is lifting, it's actually going to stay in the ear longer, so you can aerialise the line a lot longer. So I think the formation of the loop is one of the key issues, which in fact you can demonstrate as how we can actually achieve that. Because when you read the papers, Matt Brown put this out, and he said this is really hard to do, and it's even harder to teach. So with a bit of luck, Greg's going to show us how to do that.